this Sunday, TNA/Impact Wrestling marks 20 years of existence. And I think if you go back through those 20 years, there have been some significant detours. There have been multiple landing spots when it comes to broadcast partners that has brought them to this point now under the ownership of Anthem Sports and Entertainment. And for those that are longtime listeners, they will remember that Nate Milton and Brian Mann were tasked with reviewing Impact on a weekly basis, and it provided some of the most entertaining shows that we had at the time. And you guys got to experience the good, the bad, and the TNA of it all. And as we go into 20 years, Nate, I think that you are someone everyone has synonymous with the brand. How would you assess its health now and getting to this point?
Yes. Well, first of all, Brian and I did pick up the torch for Review and Impact from you and Way. So this show today is much like the new rockers meeting the old rockers, the new Midnight Express chopping it up with the old Midnight Express. It's a beautiful thing. But I think when you look at TNA, I've always said Impact, TNA, it is your friend that just can't get right. Like, they've got great ideas. At their heart, they're a hardworking person, but for whatever reason, their relationships don't last. Their jobs don't last. They might have a substance problem here and there, but they're a good person. And so I think Impact is the story of perseverance, and it's also the story of wasted potential. It's also the story of a lot of performers that might not have gotten an opportunity if not for this company being founded. So it's a very best of times, worst of times situation when you look at the history of this company and how many great folks walked through these doors and stepped in that ring. But ultimately, the company is not nearly where it could be. Looking at Slammiversary this week, like, Impact has been on a pretty good run the last few years. But the people, the viewers, the eyeballs just aren't there, in large part to a lot of the shows that you and Way covered, or particularly the shows that me and Brian covered, where that goodwill that was there when Impact first launched was lost because of so many bad decisions, so many bad hires.
Brian, how would you look at the history of TNA and what was? I agree with a lot of what Nate said. It seemed like there was some times when, I think like the roster composition was always like they had the soldiers to go out there, but sometimes it was the roles placed in.
Waiting. How dare you, sir, on this day of celebration, put that man on the screen?
He is an integral part of these 20-year histories. Is he not? Mr. Belay himself, yes.
But to me, I look at TNA and the loss of Spike TV was like such a killer to them, but not enough that, I mean, the company, they still found a way to continue onward, and there are probably many companies that would have succumbed at that point, but I thought that was such a significant blow to them. And here they are now, where I don't see a whole lot of negativity around the company at all, but it comes in at a time when you have an audience that is so concentrated with their resources when it comes to time that they have, that Impact, I mean, they are not that just ultimate alternative that you have if you're not a WWE viewer. There is a much busier makeup of wrestling companies now, and that's their fight, is just to find eyeballs for their product.
Yeah, no, I'm happy they're still around. One of the things I would say many times when we would do Review and Impact was that I don't want TNA or Impact to go away. I just don't think like Dixie Carter and some of the other people there should be involved in it. I want as many places as possible for people to work. It's just very clear that a lot of very, just ill-informed decision-making really held that thing back. You think back to, 2010 when they bring in Hogan and deciding to go down that path of Hogan and Bischoff. Think about the talent that was out there that WWE wasn't signing and had no interest in signing until Triple H revamped NXT. You had Kevin Owens out there. You had Finn Balor out there. I think Seth Rollins had signed, maybe not. But just so many of these top guys in WWE now that were available, that could have been when Heyman flirted with the idea of going there, he talked about, Danielson was available for a period of time when WWE cut him. They just were not interested in being that alternative. They just weren't thinking. They just weren't looking forward. It was a lot of, well, WWE is going to go PG. Well, then we're going to be the Attitude Era. It was a lot of looking back. It was just, unfortunately, the creative wasn't there. They had the funding, they had the distribution, they had the talent. They just didn't have the vision. And a lot of what AEW is now, I think, TNA had the ability to be at a certain point. I do think the thing that helps AEW so much is just where social media is now. A talent can get released from WWE and they don't disappear. You still follow them on Instagram. They post the videos. It's so telling that, just two examples. Ruby Soho comes out, at All Out. The crowd already knows her new name. They know her song. They pop when she comes out and they're singing along. Compare that to TNA 2010. Mr. Kennedy comes out and he has to let you know, like, my name is Mr. Anderson, and everyone groans. It's like, oh, you can't use your WWE name and you're using music that's kind of a sound alike. Or when Matt Hardy, I remember when Matt Hardy debuted and his Bischoff backstage was like, you want Hardy? I'll give you Hardy. And it's like, because you think it's Jeff, but it's Matt, just things like that. I do think that social media helps AEW a lot. TNA was just, I'm glad they existed, but they really could have been so much more than they were. And we see them still existing today. This really is the importance of independent ownership. WCW died because it was owned by a company that didn't want them around anymore. AEW could get canceled by Turner next week. That thing's not going anywhere. Tony Khan will find a way to keep it going. He'll find a place for it. And we see that with Impact, that, it will continue and it will live. And I'm glad it's out there to give people opportunities and a job. They are, I would say, a distant third right now. I think there's still a lot of things they could do better. I mean, the fact that they got Kenny Omega for as long as they did and really didn't capitalize on it, I don't think. He raised interest a little bit, but there was no long-term, and I do put that on TNA. But yeah, I'm glad they're still around. I'm glad people are still getting jobs. And I also think they're doing a different kind of pro wrestling than the two major companies. And there are people that are there that fit better there, so, I'm glad they're still around.
And I think if nothing else of this, and believe me, the Anthem era got off to an incredibly rocky start when you go back to the issues with Jeff Jarrett that led to his exit, the brief rebranding to Global Force Wrestling, the very public feud with the Hardys at the time. Like, it was like a really bad scene in 2017, and the installation of Scott D'Amore, like, they have certainly found stability at this point, which has not been a hallmark of TNA's history of the majority of those 20 years. But Nate, I would say, like, the comparison I always went back to was when NXT really got rolling. It to me was, this is everything TNA should have been in terms of, like, here's a Florida-based company in, they're not booking giant arenas, but they are catering to an audience that TNA, as Brian mentioned, like, WWE wasn't going after, like, this sector of talent. That TNA, they had the funding behind them, and it just, to me, became a trap of going for the biggest names, the biggest stars, and then it suddenly became a one-upmanship where every month, what was the new toy that we could bring in here? And it came at the expense of that core that they ultimately just did not have the preservation to state, these are going to be our stars, and they are going to graduate into becoming the key pillars of our whole company. And instead it got, to me, watered down at different times by scooping up every free agent and not having an identity. I think that's a huge part of TNA's history, is not having that clear identity and constantly shifting.
Yeah. Are we Southern wrestling? Are we a hardcore promotion? Are we old school? Are we new school? Like, are we flippity floppities? Like, what are we? What is TNA? What is Impact Wrestling? Has always been one of the hallmark questions that this company's faced. And I feel, John, like they had it, man. They had everything and didn't know what to do with it. You had from day one, you had the talent, man. Day one, when that company opens its doors, you got people like AJ Styles, James Storm, Low Key, Jerry Lynn on the roster, Elix Skipper. A few years later, you had somebody like Monty Brown, who I think is one of the biggest missteps in the history of that company in terms of booking and when to put the rocket behind somebody.
You've carried that torch for Monty Brown.
Monty
for
Brown could have been huge, man. Like Monty Brown could have been like, I'm not saying they would have beat the WWE, but damn it, we didn't need another Jeff Jarrett title run. Nobody. I'm sure if we talk to Jeff right now, Jeff would be like, "Yeah, that was my bad, y'all." Because
you know what he was missing though? Marquis Corvon. That's what he was missing. It's like can't headline with Monty. I mean,
yeah.
The name on the marquee says Corvon.
But yeah, like they had the talent. I feel like Brian's right. Like it's a combination of misallocated funds. Like why are we paying for Hogan and Bischoff and all of Hogan's friends? Like ain't nobody need to see the Nasty Boys, man. Like no disrespect to Knobs and Sags. They didn't need the TV time when you have people like Beer Money or people like AJ Styles, people like Kenny King on the roster that could have used that time. And so
you know who started with them the day after that Monday night 3-hour show? The Young Bucks.
Yes, Generation Me. Or Generation Next.
And that goes to show you, like, they had their eye on talent, but it came to utilization of them. And I would imagine, like, that is a blip in the Young Bucks history. But for many people, that was probably their first introduction when they came in as Generation Me.
And they were hot. Like I want to think about like that Unbreakable period when we got AJ, Daniels, and Joe. Like there was a time where the audience was behind them. Like when you're hearing TNA chants at WWE shows, where it seemed like, hey, all we need is one more thing to get this over the hump, and it never came. It never came, Brian.
Absolutely, and I don't think you can overstate the importance of social media in helping AEW and helping the Bullet Club get over, and helping. Being the Elite, I think, was a massive way for these performers to connect with their audience directly. TNA just, I don't think they ever really properly identified who their audience was. And definitely the way that Dixie talked about them, she certainly didn't respect her audience either. It felt like it was kind of like a project to keep her time, and she trusted a lot of the wrong people, unfortunately. That is kind of the long and short of it with them. It could have been a lot more than it was, unfortunately.
I think much of the difference is Dixie a wrestling fan? I think she maybe likes being around professional wrestlers. Maybe she enjoys, owning a company that, creates professional wrestling. But is she the level of a wrestling fan that her audience is? Tony Khan is that person. Tony Khan is a fan, and that is the difference. That is a major difference in taste and knowing who to push, who to acquire, and what mistakes not to make for your future. I think that's been something that honestly has been plaguing Impact throughout its entire or most of its ownership.
And AEW has the benefit of hindsight. We can see where Impact went wrong. We can see where WCW went wrong and avoid those pitfalls. But I will say, because obviously the history of TNA, the history of Impact Wrestling is fraught. But I got to give them credit for a couple things. Number one, with the knockouts, man. I think the way they presented their women, when you got Gail Kim, Awesome Kong, the beautiful people, ODB, like when you they were treating the women with a level of respect that the WWE was not at the time. And I thought that was important. The other thing was, speaking specifically as a Black wrestling fan, people like Ron Killings, Elix Skipper, Monty Brown, even if they didn't do the best with him, D'Angelo De Niro, Rich Swann, thinking about current day. Like, I think there's a lot of Black athletes that might not have gotten the same shot in another company that they got in TNA. And so the fact that they were able to get TV time, that they were able to make a living and get paid, I always appreciated that. In that TNA, the booking might be all shot to hell, but at least we got a lot of talented people of color. We got a lot of talented women getting a check. At least during the days when TNA was able to pay people, because there was a time when people wasn't getting them checks.
And this was actually the aftermath of some of those Rewind and Impact shows that Nate and Brian would do. This is what it seemed like afterwards, some empty bottles. Nate, as we wrap up this discussion, if you're going back and you don't have follow like business trends of the company, but just for yourself personally, what was the high point of Impact Wrestling? If you could go back to a period of time when you felt they were firing on the most cylinders.
Yeah, and I alluded to it earlier. I think the high point was that Unbreakable era. where you got, Joe and Daniels and Styles killing it. You got a hot undercard. The women are starting to get a little bit more shine. You're still like, I remember like religiously, like this back, a little history lesson here, kids. I still had the TV with the VCR in it at the time. And sometimes I'd have to go to work on nights where Impact was airing. I'm setting the the VCR, programming it to make sure I can catch this Impact Wrestling on Spike TV, man. Like that to me was the height, the apex of Impact Wrestling. We got to the depths when Terry and the crew came in, but I think where we're at now in 2022 is an Impact Wrestling that has a spot. It's not the greatest spot in the world. Like Brian said, at best, they're a distant third, maybe even fourth, depending on who you ask, but they're still around. To quote Hamilton, the fact that you're alive is a miracle. To stay alive, would that be enough, TNA?
On those words, everybody, could we possibly follow? I don't think so.